Our guest speaker today requires no introduction, as I'm sure is very well known to most of you, having also been an honorary member while he was Lord Mayor. I've known Martin since 2004, soon after having started my second stint of life here in Australia. At that time, Martin was consulting for a client that was using my retail management software. It has been a great pleasure getting to know him and following his very successful and diverse career path. The topic chosen for today's speech should resonate strongly with most of us, both in our personal lives as well as Rotarians. The need to keep changing and adapting is in fact not only relevant for individuals, but even more so for organizations and businesses that want to remain successful and relevant. My fellow Rotarian friends and guests, without further ado, please let's give a warm welcome to Martin Haese.
Adriano, thank you very much indeed. President Rajiv, thank you for your hospitality. Past presidents, Rotarians. It's nice to be back. I was just sharing with Stephen Haynes that I last presented at a Rotary Adelaide function here at Adelaide Oval, probably in early 2015, when I was the Lord Mayor of Adelaide. And I just wish I had that bell which you had on your... Stephen, we should have had that at Adelaide City Council. Today, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I very much appreciate it. And I'm actually going to share a very different topic. So, over quite a number of years, I've usually spoken about a specific subject, which might be something happening in the city, it might be a policy development, it might be something happening in the community. But I'm going to talk to something which I think does run deep with all of us. And it's service, and of course that is a foundation stone of Rotary, but also what does reinvention mean, and what does it mean to continuing to be able to provide service to others, whether it's your family, whether it's your community, whether it's your city, your state or your nation, and very much the topic I'd like to share. But I'm going to start with how in many ways we are individually shaped. And I'm going to share a story, I must say, and we do learn through storytelling. I'm a big believer that we all learn through storytelling. Storytelling is very powerful. But I'm going to share a story which I've never shared. And it shaped in so many ways how I have thought and how I think today. And that came from my grandfather. It was my grandfather on my mother's side, who I still remember very, very fondly. We've all got people who play an instrumental role in our lives in shaping who we become. And I think we should always acknowledge them. Now, of course, my grandfather has long passed, but his life was an extraordinary life. He was born in Australia, but spent most of his working life in Southeast Asia, whereby my mother was born in Medan, in what is now Indonesia. But all prior to World War II, my grandfather and my grandmother and my mother lived in Medan. They lived in Singapore, and my wife is Singaporean, so I spent a lot of time in that city, but also Penang. And my grandfather was the managing director of a large company which many of you would know of and remember very well, called Cable and Wireless. A telco in today's language, a British telco. And he looked after Southeast Asia, and at that point in time, Cable and Wireless would have been expanding very rapidly through Southeast Asia. Now, 2 days before Singapore fell, my grandmother and my mother left on, I think was probably the last ship or the second to last ship that got them safely to Perth. My grandfather stayed because effectively he was running the telecommunications system on behalf of the British in Singapore. So he was captured and he spent most of the balance of the war in Changi. And it was an extraordinary story, and it was a story which I only learnt in many ways later in my life. But very, very, profound in many ways. So he was a very kind of upright gentleman of a man. And after surviving Changi, which I think in itself was extraordinary, he was, at one period during that 3 years, locked in a hole underground of 4 feet by 4 feet for 3 months. And it saved his life. Because when he came out, everybody else in the tent where he was living had died of malaria. So it was this fortuitous piece of happenstance which actually managed to save his life. But where I'd like to take you is to this incredible inflection point, which he shared with me when I was very young. In the early 1950s, he said to his wife, now firmly settled in Adelaide, he said, I think we need to take a holiday. And she said, yes, you've been working very hard and I think you should do that. And I think we should go to Tokyo. Now, you could imagine the context of that. I don't think there are a lot of Australians venturing to Tokyo in the early 1950s. And he said, no, we must, and we're going. So they went, and in Tokyo, he located the prison guard who was basically looking after his unit. I'll use the word looking after loosely. My grandfather was brutalised by this man for years. And my grandmother thought her husband had lost his marbles, I can assure you. And they went. He found this gentleman, reconciled their past together, and became lifelong friends. He wrote to him for the rest of his life. They looked after each other's families. Sorry, I've never told this story. And as a young kid, he told me this, and he had never spoken about it. A lot of people through World War II never spoke about World War II, and that's well documented. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a military man, but being a civilian in Changi running the telecommunications system for Singapore, he was treated worse than a military man, because he was actually treated as a spy. And everyone, or some of us would know the military code that spies are treated worse than military. He survived all of this and went on and lived a very, very good life. But what a learning for a 10-year-old when your grandfather sits down and tells you that story. And in so many ways, that shaped my entire life. And he was very committed to service of others, clearly very committed to the service of his family, but very, very active in the community in South Australia on a multitude of levels, and made a conscious decision that having survived that, I'm going to serve others. That's going to be my life story. And as a 10-year-old, you take it in, you absorb it, you ruminate on it, but you learn from it, and often it sticks. And with me, in many ways, it did stick. So I saw my future when I was leaving school in business. And I set up a retail business. I was fortunate, and retail's not an easy industry for those that are in it, you would know. But I was very fortunate, and I built an 18-store retail chain, and that's where I met Adri. Across Australia, and I had 250 employees, and we were manufacturing in Australia, Indonesia, India, China. I was travelling widely. It was a busy time for about 15 years. And I was very fortunate in about 2005. I had a good exit from that business because we sold it to a publicly listed company. And that in many ways enabled me to do a whole range of things publicly, which it gave me the resources to do things and not have to worry about providing income to some degree. But I go back to those learnings from my grandfather, which I took into my retail business. I took it into my Lord Mayoralty. I took it into my role as Chief Executive Officer of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry here in South Australia, Business SA, during COVID. It is a very consistent thread of my success is not my success. Your success is my success. And when people are being supported, when people are being listened to, when people are being helped with their own difficulties in life, and we all have them, we all have ups and downs, I think that is really, in so many ways, the hallmark of an individual, and that's the hallmark of a life well lived. And I certainly have this credo that I say to myself, am I doing everything I can? And I don't think we can ever answer that question honestly, because I feel like I never am doing enough. But we've always got to keep putting that foot forward to support our families, our cities, our communities, our nation, and the wider world. I think everyone here would be united in the fact they all believe in humanity. Also, if I look along that journey, I was, again, fortunate. My godmother was Dame Roma Mitchell. And she, when I was a young man, was also a very instrumental influence on my own personal development. So I've had these individuals in so many ways, but I'm blessed, who have shaped kind of my trajectory over the years. And I went from being a retailer to supporting and advocating on behalf of retailers. I managed Rundle Mall for and on behalf of the City Council, and it was kind of my first foray into working with City Council. And I started on the board of this organisation, the Rundle Mall Management Authority, in 2008 after I'd sold my business, and then I became the general manager of it in 2010. And that largely took me through until which time I ran for public office in 2014. And there are no guarantees in life, especially when you put yourself out very, very publicly to endeavour to have a vision which you hope is going to support the city. And again, I was very, very blessed to be elected in 2014, and there was no guarantee of that, I can assure you. It was a 218 vote margin. It was very slim. But I woke up the next morning with an absolute thud, and I remember reconciling that in my own mind, and I said, well, there's been 77 people since 1840 who have individually done this role before I have. What I don't know, I will ask. What I don't know, I will work out. And I credit Mr. Stephen Haynes for helping me do that. And it was an incredible journey, but it was a journey of service. I never viewed that as a political career. Some do, and I respect that, but I didn't. I viewed that as a community role. And when you look at the role of Lord Mayor, it's kind of sometimes called first amongst equals, because you're working with a multitude of other mayors through other municipalities right around Australia, South Australia and Australia, if not beyond. So the service theme just continued, and I ultimately thought that I would end up where I started, which is in business, and that's what I'm doing now. But I took a contract with Business SA, the Chamber of Commerce, as a segue from a very high-profile public role into a role which would just re-establish my bona fides in the business market and get to know and get to listen to more business people across all industries before kind of realising my goal of ultimately going back into business, which I'm doing this year. And, of course, our friend COVID arrived. And this was early 2020, and the world changed abruptly. And the impact on some industries, as we know, was acute. The impact on other industries, curiously, was beneficial. And we don't judge that, good on them. But there was an incredibly deep impact on many of the customer-facing industries, as you can possibly imagine. And it really reinforced the notion of empathy. That I had people that I've known have been in business for many, many years who would come to me and they'd say, look, I am just on the precipice of losing all of it. And I had people just literally breaking down in front of me. What can you do to help? How can you advocate to the state government? What are you doing with the federal government, Martin? Are you talking to the federal treasurer, Martin? And we were. We were in advocacy overdrive with regards to South Australia and also working with my colleagues nationally through the Chambers of Commerce into Federal Parliament. And it was, and I can remember 2020, I've always been a hard worker, but I didn't take a day off, not one, in 2020. Because Business SA, the Chamber of Commerce, which I think is an incredibly important organisation for South Australia with a lot of history, was facing its own financial gremlins as a result of COVID. But at the same time, we could not share that publicly because we had to be at the top of our game in terms of representing the people we should represent, which is our members. So I thought, I'm going to save the farm, but I'm going to help save the state in terms of the businesses. And my team did an incredible job of watching a group of people, I had 83 employees, is watching a group of people so measurably change gear and step up in support of others who were in their time of need. I must say, we didn't have all the answers, but we certainly had the determination. And that was an extraordinary journey. And 3 years later, I've handed it over to Andrew Kay, who I think will be a very good chief executive, and the organisation is in good shape. But that was a very intense 7 or 8 years. I don't think I drew breath. I don't think I drew breath from about 2014 to about late last year. Reinvention is due to technology, due to externalities like COVID, due to changing consumer trends, due to everything, isn't it? Is that being adept at reinvention, embracing reinvention, and whatever that means to you. But for me, it meant education, I must say. Every decade I go back and study something differently in order to reskill myself. But also learning more about other industries. I certainly have found that one of the greatest commodities in life is to be incredibly curious and to ask a lot of questions about things that you don't know. I mean, none of us know it all, and none of us should ever pretend to know it all. But to ask questions of others, to learn from others, and to be curious is an incredibly valuable commodity in my experience. It served me well in public life because I certainly did not have all the answers, but I certainly had a lot of questions. You can always find a subject matter expert, even if you're not one. But sometimes life is about knowing what questions to ask. And I think I've become good at that, and I enjoy that. You know, I enjoy people. I enjoy communities. So being aware, cognizant, I did a podcast on this last week, which I've been told has been very, very popular. And we spoke for an hour about reinvention and what does it mean and what skills and what are the outcomes and how do you go about it. And I summarised it in many ways. I said, look, you must be curious. You must always be searching. You must have a good heart in terms of looking to support others, always. And if you do that, in so many ways, you get looked after. And I have been looked after. I mean, I've had an extraordinarily good life. Not one to complain, I'm incredibly appreciative. But that doesn't mean for a second that you take your foot off the intensity of supporting and helping others, especially those who are struggling. I think it's an incredibly important principle. In 2023, I now am on 3 boards. I'm doing a lot of work for the State Government of South Australia. I'm launching my own business this year, which is more focused on investment. I've always been a very quiet investor. I'm gradually becoming a more public investor. And we spoke earlier about multimedia and social media and so forth, and it's something which I have embraced over the years. And but I'm very judicious about how I communicate on my social media, and that it's always positive, because we get to determine, don't we, how we conduct our own narrative with communities. And I think we've all got to be positive about something which is inspiring and kind of motivating people to become the best version of themselves. So I'm certainly doing more of that through my own social media channels, and I'm kind of become a little bit of a podcaster of all things. And I was told yesterday that we had 300 people in Germany listening to our podcast. And I said, gosh, I don't speak German. So my message to, in many ways, Rotary, because I am here, I'm fortunate enough, I'm talking to the converted. And when I said to Adri, I want to have a chat about service and reinvention, Adriano said, that is right on message with, your audience, Martin. And I was very appreciative of being an honorary Rotarian between 2014 and 2018. That's a belated thank you, everyone. Thank you for your very kind hospitality. But the service gets lost in this me type of culture today. We do live in a world where people are very me-centric. And I think that only underscores how extraordinarily important it is, the work that you do, supporting each other, but supporting others and South Australia, part of a national and global community of Rotary, we need more of that, and we need to be educating, future generations about the importance of that, because this is surely the glue that keeps our society together. So, a very big belated thanks to Rotary for the work that you do. So I might end on that note, and I just want to say, keep up the terrific work. Keep striving, re-educating yourself, retooling yourself in many, many ways. I think reinvention as a notion, and I was sharing this actually on this podcast, is completely and utterly ageless. age does not have a great deal to do towards the whole conversation of reinvention. It has everything to do with our aptitude. And I kind of personally would love to be working and serving, for every day that I'm on this planet. I don't really understand the concept of retirement. But I want to be doing that locally, and I want to be, moving a little more around. I've been very fortunate in the last 6 months. Out of the last 6 months, I've spent 3 of them in Singapore, the US and the UK. And I certainly want to be a little more mobile in my future, but that doesn't lessen my commitment to South Australia one iota. So just want to say thank you, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Martin. Usual questions from the floor, please. Anyone has got any questions? Lisa?
I think I've just beat Florian. Thank you so much, Martin. My question, in general, mostly because you didn't mention, what's your current resources in terms of service? What are you doing next? Because I'm sure Adri will invite you to join our club. However, what other things do you have in mind at the moment?
I actually do a lot of pro bono work for the government. I do some paid work for the government, but I do a lot of pro bono work for the government. And about things which I'm passionate about. So I would put 20 hours a week currently into a role, because I've got now more capacity to do it. I've been the chair of the Premier's Climate Change Council since December 2018. And in so many ways, based upon South Australia's renewable energy leadership, which is world leading, it's very much the way of the future. And it's also the way of industry in the future too. So I'm doing a lot of work in that space, and it's playing to my skill set. I understand that space, I enjoy that space. That would be probably one of the largest. I'm a pro bono chair of a private organisation helping them build, which is a PTY Ltd. And I do a fair bit of this in terms of various responses to organisations who want to have a chat about a specific topic. I've been doing a bit of mentoring also with people who are looking to establish their lives or establish their business or both. I'm fairly commercially literate, so but not in a pure dollars and cents type of perspective, I guess, if that makes sense. So I can, sit with a business person and understand exactly what the issues are, but I often come at things from a different perspective. So I hope that answers the question.
I think you are a little bit more than just a bit proficient, but anyway. Any other question? Florian?
Question about competing demand. So when you talk about service, how do you select? I mean, in the sense saying, like, if you are working for the Chamber of Commerce, you might have 3 businesses who are struggling. Which one do you actually help, or which one do you advocate more for? As like the city, you pick between putting a playground there and putting basically like some senior citizen center on the other side. So how do you essentially think about like the process of like who do you actually support, who do you actually serve when you're a decision? Yeah, you serve, but where and when? How do you decide about that?
Florian, that's a very good question, and I can share some good examples. So when I was the Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce, we, an organisation with 4,000 members across South Australia representing 17 industries. So that's a broad church in anyone's description, as you could imagine. And some of these organisations are startups, and some of these organisations would have turnover of $400 million. So it is everything in between. We had to aggregate as to where the need was the most acute. So I'll use COVID as an example, but you could use this analogy for many things, is that the hospitality sector, the retail sector, and a number of the services sectors were disproportionately impacted immediately in 2020. Other industries were able to decentralise, and in other industries their demand actually went up. But these industries, I had business people saying to me, and not one, many, saying, I've owned this business for 25 years and my turnover has dropped 95%. You're not going to last long when your turnover has dropped 95%. So we would harvest all of this information, and then I would mobilise the resources of Business SA to articulate a solution to government. So yes, I was talking to many, many, many individuals, but I was advocating on behalf of all of them. And I was going to have more impact, interestingly, through the latter than the former. I had to listen. People would ring me, or I'd ring them, and I would just listen. But it was the action that we turned that into in terms of advocacy to government, which was actually what was going to save them. So JobKeeper and things like that did not come around by mistake. And we may all debate the level of debt that this country has, but we would have lost thousands, many, many thousands of business without it. So knowing when to individualise and knowing when to aggregate would probably be the answer to the question.
Stephen Noble.
Thank you, Martin. That was, I think, an excellent address. It's not really so much of a question, but I'm just going to share with you, at risk of having mentioned this to Rotarians here present previously. We have a federal minister for charities, and I had the opportunity to attend a forum in Adelaide about last August, and he did a whip around Australia in relation to presenting his new portfolio, if you like, and then giving people who are in the not-for-profit sector the opportunity to attend. I think there's something like 37,000 bodies registered the ACNC, the Australian Charities Not-for-Profit Commission. What he did was he shared with us as a background what's been happening. And we in Rotary are well aware that our membership numbers are declining, but this is across the whole spectrum, including the unions, which he shared with us, which is an interesting comment in itself. But he mentioned as one measure how there's been a monitoring of every book published in Australia in the last 40-odd years, and they only measure, I think, 2 or 3 words, which in aggregate are about 5 or 6 letters. It's I, we and me. And the amount of times that we is used has inexorably decreased over the last 40 years, which gets back to your very comment about me, the me generation. So, as I said, I'm just reinforcing your comment, but there's statistical evidence which shows that it's not just now, it's been a trend for a long time.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, and probably doesn't surprise us, as unfortunate as that is. I mean, I think the important question is, how do we reverse that? It's interesting how organisations can redefine themselves in times of crisis. And sorry about the segue, but I did have a thought there. Is when we had hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses in time of need in 2020, my staff were saying to me, we would receive 50 inquiries a day. I still use the word we, Business SA, would receive about 50 inquiries a day of an industrial relations type of matter. That's one of the core services of a Chamber of Commerce, is to provide employers with advice about industrial relations. Onset of COVID, that immediately escalated from 50 to 350 inquiries every single day. Now, I have an events department, I have an industrial relations department, I have a membership department. They're not necessarily transferable skills, as you can imagine. Industrial relations is complex. And they said, Martin, many of these business people are desperate, and they're not members of Business SA. And I said, okay, what are you doing about that? I was saying, well, I'm not quite sure if we can help them. And I said, no, we'll help them. The phones are open. They're calling the government, they're not getting an answer. So we'll help them. And I said, and you let me work out the financial sustainability of the organisation, you help the members, or the general public in this case, in terms of the business owners. And we did this for about 3 or 4 months when things were at their most acute. Now, at this point in time, I think Business SA, and this is not why we did it because it was the just obvious thing to do in my view. I think we had 2,600 members at that point in time. In 2020, by the end of 2021, we had 4,000 members. And I don't know if I'd solely credit that on the fact that we went above and beyond and just did a lot of things and asked for nothing. But I think there is some kind of law of the universe that does work here. And certainly by mid-2021 onwards, our phones were running hot from businesses saying, now, what do you do? Are you a membership organisation? Are you a government department? We're not. We're a private. We're A, C and C also. And I said, no, we're a not-for-profit. We're a membership-driven organisation, not-for-profit. And they said, right, I want to join because you saved my business last year. And that's an incredible story. And I remember kind of a year later bringing all my team together and saying, look what is happening to this organisation. From our darkest hour, which was everybody else's darkest hour in 2021, we are now on a completely different trajectory. It was a really interesting analogy. It changed the culture of that organisation materially into one of service. It was an extraordinary turnaround, it really was.
Martin, thank you so much for dedicating your time to share this chat with us today. It's really appreciated, and this is a certificate of appreciation. The club will make a donation on your behalf to one of our community service support organizations. Thank you, Adrian. And this little item has been knitted by some of the partners of the Rotarians of this club. And thank you so much. Thank you.